You know that feeling, right? You've been learning, researching, maybe cramming for something important, soaking up information from every angle.
Hmm.
But even with all that input, you still feel a bit shaky, like you're standing on loose sand, not solid ground.
Yeah, or you see really smart people fundamentally disagreeing on things.
Exactly. And you wonder, okay, who's right? How can I really know what's true? Is there anything I can trust completely?
That search for certainty, I mean, in a sea of doubt, it's profoundly human. And probably more relevant today than ever, with information overload coming at us from all directions.
Absolutely. And that feeling, that fundamental question about how to find truth and build knowledge you can trust, well, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Hmm.
We're cracking open a classic text that grapples with this head on. René Descartes' Discourse on the Method.
Our source for this is the Project Gutenberg ebook, the English translation.
Mm.
And it's a fascinating way to encounter it because Descartes didn't write it like some dry, formal treatise, not initially anyway.
Oh, really? How did he frame it?
He framed it more as a personal story, like an intellectual autobiography, detailing his own journey and the method he developed to navigate all that doubt and, seek truth.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it's structured into 6 parts, almost like he's telling this tale of discovery.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to trace that journey with him, understand his core ideas and that famous method he devised,
Right.
and really see why this little book, written centuries ago, still resonates so powerfully with our modern challenges of finding solid ground in, well, an uncertain world. Let's unpack this.
So Descartes kicks off his story by describing his education. He went into it with this belief, this hope really, that studying at one of Europe's most celebrated schools would equip him with clear and certain knowledge about everything important in life.
And he studied everything: languages, history, eloquence, poetry, maths, morals, theology, philosophy, law, medicine. I mean, the full works for that time. He really committed to the traditional path.
He did. But here's the kind of striking insight from this first part of his story. Despite going to this prestigious school and studying diligently, he came out feeling, well, full of doubts and errors.
Really? After all that.
Yeah. He realized that his extensive education had primarily just revealed to him how much he didn't know, the extent of his own ignorance, basically.
Wow.
He looked at philosophy, which is supposed to be the foundation of knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he just saw endless disputes among the most learned men with, no single point agreed upon.
Wow. So he put in all that work, got the gold standard education of the day, and the big takeaway was, okay, wait, none of this feels certain and the experts can't even agree. That feels surprisingly familiar today, doesn't it?
It really does. You read a dozen articles on something and end up more confused because they all contradict each other.
Exactly.
Now, he wasn't dismissing all learning, though. He still saw value in things. Languages, for reading older works. History, if you read it carefully, for broadening your perspective.
Mm.
Mathematics, definitely, for its certainty.
Okay, so not a total rejection.
No, but he had some pretty sharp critiques, like spending too much time on ancient stuff or traveling could make you a stranger in your own time and place. History and fables, easily misleading.
Right.
Eloquence and poetry felt more like natural gifts, not systematic knowledge. And mathematics, even with its certain foundations, he felt hadn't been used to build much that was truly useful or profound yet. He was kind of astonished by that.
And the other fields?
He saw moralists building on shaky ground, theology as being sort of above reason, needing divine help. And philosophy, well, having no undisputed truths just made any science built upon it equally uncertain. Plus, he wasn't really chasing fame or fortune from science anyway.
Right. So this disillusionment, that must have been a turning point.
It was his first big one. He decided to step away from the books for a while, to seek knowledge elsewhere,
Very rare.
in himself and in what he called the great book of the world.
The book of the world.
Meaning traveling, observing diverse people and customs, gathering actual real-world experience, and then using that to reflect and improve his own understanding.
Okay, getting out there.
Exactly. And during this time, he had another key realization. He often found more solid truth in the practical reasoning of ordinary individuals managing their own lives, where mistakes have real consequences, than in the abstract theories of scholars arguing about stuff that didn't seem to connect to reality.
Like, show me what works in the real world, not just what sounds good in theory.
Precisely. He saw these vast differences in customs across cultures and learned not to just automatically believe something because it was customary or everyone else did it. That habit, he felt, was a huge source of error.
That makes sense. Blindly following tradition isn't always the best path.
Definitely not.
Hmm.
So after several years of this kind of observation and reflection, he reached a firm resolution. He would make himself the primary object of study.
Turn the focus inward.
Yes, and use all his mental faculties to figure out the right path forward and build his own system of knowledge from the ground up.
Which sets the stage perfectly for part two, where he starts forging the intellectual tools he needs. This happens during a quiet winter in Germany, right? He's alone with his thoughts.
Yes, exactly. And he gets inspired by these analogies, thinking about things designed by a single mind versus those built piecemeal over time.
Like what?
Well, think of a grand building planned by one architect versus, say, an old city wall that's been patched up and added to over centuries. Or a well-planned city versus one that just grew organically from a village.
Okay, the unified design versus the messy evolution.
Right. He felt that things conceived and executed by a single entity, guided by a clear plan, often showed greater perfection and coherence.
And he applied this idea to his own mind.
He did. He thought, look, our opinions and beliefs, we've gathered them since childhood from all sorts of conflicting sources, different teachers, varied experiences, cultural customs. They're likely not as coherent or correct as if they'd been structured by pure reason right from the start.
So a bit of a jumbled mess, potentially.
Potentially, yes. And this led him to this really radical decision to basically clear the ground, tear down all his existing opinions, and rebuild his whole knowledge system right from the foundations.
Wow, like renovating a house?
Exactly like that analogy, like a private individual tearing down and rebuilding their own house. But he was very clear this is his personal project. He wasn't calling for some big public reform. He saw that as impractical, even dangerous.
A personal intellectual demolition and reconstruction?
Pretty much. He looked at the existing tools for seeking knowledge, traditional logic. Useful for explaining things you already know, he thought, but not great for discovering new truths. Too many confusing rules mixed in.
And maths. Geometry, algebra.
Important, but he found them too abstract, too tied up in complex rules and figures that could fatigue the imagination.
So he wanted something simpler, more direct.
Yes. Instead of loads of rules, he distilled his method down to just 4 core precepts, and he committed to following them rigorously without fail.
Okay, this is it. The famous Cartesian method. What's rule number 1?
Rule 1, often called the rule of doubt or evidence. Never accept anything as true unless you know it so clearly and distinctly that you have absolutely no reason to doubt it. Avoid jumping to conclusions. Avoid prejudice. Only include what's utterly beyond doubt.
Okay, crystal clear certainty or nothing. What's next?
Rule 2, the rule of division. Take any complex problem, any difficulty, and break it down into as many smaller, simpler parts as you possibly can as needed to solve it effectively.
Divide and conquer, basically. Rule 3.
Rule 3, the rule of order. Guide your thoughts in an orderly way. Start with the simplest things, the easiest ones to understand, and then gradually, step by step, ascend to understanding the more complex things. He even said you should impose an order on things that don't naturally seem to have one.
Build complexity from simplicity. Makes sense. And the last one.
Rule 4, the rule of enumeration. Make your reviews, your checks, your lists so complete in general that you can be absolutely certain you haven't missed anything. Be thorough.
Clarity, division, order, completeness. Those are the 4.
That's the core. He was really inspired by geometry, how mathematicians use these long chains of simple, logical steps to reach incredibly complex conclusions with absolute certainty.
Right, like proving a theorem.
Exactly. He believed that all things we can know are connected in a similar way, that nothing is so hidden or difficult that we can't eventually discover it as long as we follow this method carefully. Build truth upon truth, each step resting on solid, certain ground.
So he saw mathematics as the model.
Yes, he felt maths alone had really achieved that level of certainty. So he started practicing his method there, focusing on the underlying ideas of order and measurement, rather than specific numbers or shapes. Using symbols, simple lines to represent relationships, sort of combining the best bits of geometry and algebra as he saw it.
And did it work for him?
He found it incredibly effective, solved mathematical problems with surprising ease, gained much clearer insights. He definitely hoped to apply this method to all sciences.
But not straight away.
No, he realized he needed solid philosophical principles first, a foundation. So he decided to pause that grand project, keep practicing the method, gather more experience, and wait until he felt ready before tackling the full scientific reconstruction. He was about 23 at this point.
Which brings us to part 3 and a really practical problem he faced.
Yeah, if you're busy tearing down your entire intellectual house, all your old beliefs, to rebuild them, well, you can't just stop living in the meantime, right? You still need to function day to day.
You need somewhere to live while the renovation's happening. So he needed a temporary set of rules for how to act.
Exactly, a provisional moral code, just something to guide his actions while his main intellectual work was ongoing.
Okay, what was in this temporary code?
His first maxim was about sort of prudence and fitting in reasonably well. He resolved to stick firmly to his religious faith, the one he was raised in. And in his everyday conduct, he'd follow the most moderate and commonly accepted opinions of the most sensible people around him.
Sensible people.
Yeah.
How did he judge that?
Well, shrewdly, he decided to judge their real opinions by how they acted, not just by what they said. Actions speak louder than words.
Good point. People often say one thing and do another.
Right. He chose moderate opinions, partly because they were convenient, less likely to cause trouble, and partly because he figured extremes are usually flawed. So even if the moderate view was a bit wrong, it would likely be closer to the truth than some extreme position.
But he stressed this was temporary.
Oh yes, absolutely. He wasn't locking himself into these views forever. His judgment might improve, the world might change. It was just a practical guide for the time being.
Okay. Maxim number 2.
This one was about being resolute in action. Once he decided on a course of action, even if it was based on opinions that were still a bit doubtful, he would follow through as firmly and decisively as if they were absolutely certain.
Even if doubtful. Why?
He used this great analogy. Imagine you're lost in a forest. Standing still or wandering randomly isn't helpful. The best bet is to pick one direction and walk consistently in a straight line.
So you'll definitely get somewhere, even if it's not the ideal place.
Exactly. Better than staying lost or going in circles. In life, action often can't wait for absolute certainty. So you act on the most probable opinion you have, and once you choose, you commit to it for that action.
And he found this helpful.
He said it freed him from regret and remorse later on, because he knew he'd acted decisively based on the best judgment available to him at that moment.
Makes sense. Okay, third maxim.
This one's maybe the most philosophical. It has a very stoic feel to it. Always try to conquer himself rather than fortune, and change his desires rather than the order of the world.
Ooh, okay. Unpack that a bit.
The core idea is that the only thing truly, absolutely within our power is our own thoughts. External events, fortune, the way the world is point, those are largely outside our control.
So focus on what you can control.
Precisely. If you've done your absolute best regarding something external, and you still don't achieve your goal, you should accept that outcome as something that was simply impossible for you in those circumstances. Don't beat yourself up about it.
Acceptance of limitations.
Right. And he argued this leads to contentment because you stop desperately wanting things you simply cannot have, like being king or having perfect health when you're seriously ill or living forever.
Easier said than done, though.
Oh, definitely. He acknowledged it required prolonged discipline and meditation. He pointed to ancient philosophers who found happiness by focusing inwardly on what they could control their thoughts and attitudes.
Okay. And the final maxim, number 4.
This is about choosing his life's work. After reviewing various human occupations, he concluded that the best path for him was to continue doing exactly what he was doing, cultivating his reason and seeking truth using the method he'd developed.
He found his calling, essentially.
Yes. He said this path brought him intense satisfaction, the joy of discovering new truths almost daily. So these maxims, they weren't just random rules. They all supported his main goal of self-instruction and seeking certainty, allowing him to function effectively in the world while he pursued his deeper intellectual project.
So, armed with his method and these provisional rules for living, what did he do next?
He spent the next 9 years traveling again, observing, reflecting, but now actively applying his method. He was trying to root out old errors from his mind and find more certain truths.
So not just passive observation anymore?
No, much more active. He wasn't being skeptical just for the sake of it, like some philosophers he criticized. He was using doubt strategically as a tool, trying to find bedrock certainty, distinguishing, as he put it, rock or clay from loose earth and sand.
Testing everything against his rules.
Yes, using clear reasoning to examine ideas, he found satisfaction even in definitively concluding that something was uncertain. He used all the observations and experiences he gathered to test his old beliefs and practiced his method constantly, not just on abstract problems, but on mathematical and other specific questions too.
And all this methodical doubting and searching eventually leads him somewhere incredibly significant, right? To part 4.
Absolutely. This is where he undertakes his most famous intellectual experiment, the quest for the very first, absolutely undeniable truth, the starting point for everything else.
And to find that, he cranks the doubt up to the maximum level.
To the absolute maximum. He decided he had to reject anything at all about which he could entertain even the slightest doubt. If there was any conceivable reason to doubt it, it had to go, at least for now.
And he took this really far, didn't he?
Oh, incredibly far. First, his senses.
Yeah.
They sometimes deceive us, right? Things look different from far away. Illusions happen. So out go the senses as a reliable source of truth.
Okay, no trusting sight or sound. What else?
His reasoning. Even in simple geometry, people make mistakes, paralogisms. So even logical deduction couldn't be trusted implicitly at this stage.
Wow, even math reasoning is potentially flawed.
In the sense that we can make errors applying it, yes, he couldn't be absolutely certain his reasoning was always correct. And then, the big one, waking life itself.
How could he doubt that?
Well, he thought, the thoughts and sensations I have when I'm awake feel incredibly real. But so do the thoughts and sensations I have in dreams. And dreams clearly aren't true representations of reality. So how can I be absolutely certain right now that I'm not just dreaming?
The dream argument. That's unsettling.
It is. He pushed it to the extreme, hypothesizing that maybe all his past thoughts and experiences, everything he believed, were nothing more than illusions, perhaps put there by some powerful, deceiving entity.
A total matrix scenario, almost. So everything doubted. What was left?
But in the very act of trying to doubt everything, he hit something solid, something he realized he couldn't doubt.
Which one?
Well, he could doubt the content of his thoughts, whether they were true, whether he was really seeing a tree or just dreaming it. He could not doubt that he, the one doing the doubting, the thinking, the being deceived, must exist.
I think, therefore I am.
Cogito ergo sum. Exactly. He realized this insight was so fundamentally certain, so self-evident, that no amount of skeptical doubt, however extreme, could possibly undermine it. To doubt it, he had to exist to do the doubting.
That's the bedrock, the first principle he was searching for.
The absolute foundation. Okay, so he knows he exists as a thinking thing, but what is this I that thinks? He explored that next.
Right. What is the nature of this thinking self?
He reasoned. I can imagine having no body. I can imagine there's no physical world, no space. All that could be an illusion. But could I imagine not existing while I am actively thinking or doubting?
No, because the thinking proves the existence.
Precisely. He realized that if he were to stop thinking entirely, he would have no reason whatsoever to believe he existed. So thinking wasn't just something he did, it was his very essence.
So the I is fundamentally a mind.
He concluded that I am a substance whose whole essence or nature is simply to think. It doesn't require any place, any material thing, any body in order to exist. The mind or soul is entirely distinct from the body.
And he found the mind easier to know than the body.
Yes, surprisingly. Because even if his senses were deceiving him about his body and the world, the fact of his thinking, his consciousness, was immediate and undeniable. The mind's existence was more certain than the body's.
Okay, so he's got his own existence as a thinking thing. What's the next step from that first principle?
He asked himself why this truth, I think, therefore I am, was so certain, what made it stand out. And he identified its key quality, the incredible clarity and distinctness with which he perceived it. It wasn't fuzzy or ambiguous, it was sharp, undeniable.
Clarity and distinctness.
Yes, and this led him to propose a general rule for truth. Whatever I perceive very clearly and very distinctly must be true.
That sounds powerful, but maybe a bit tricky.
He immediately acknowledged the difficulty. How do you really know for sure when an idea is genuinely clear and distinct and you're not just fooling yourself, or it only seems clear? That's a crucial challenge.
Okay, so how did he try to shore up that rule? This is where God comes in, isn't it?
Exactly. This is his next major move. He reflected on his own state. The very fact that he could doubt showed him that he was imperfect. Knowing he was imperfect implied he has some idea of perfection to compare himself against.
Right, you can't know you're falling short unless you have some concept of the standard.
Precisely. So where did this idea of a more perfect being than himself come from? It couldn't have just sprung from nothing, and it couldn't have come from himself. Because he knew he was imperfect, the less perfect cannot create the idea of the more perfect.
So it must come from.
It must have been placed in him by a being that was actually more perfect than he was, a being that possessed all the perfections he could conceive of, including existence itself. This perfect being, he concluded, is God.
So the idea of God in his mind proves God's existence.
That's one part of his argument. He also argued that the very concept of a supremely perfect being necessarily includes existence, just like the concept of a triangle necessarily includes its angles summing to 180 degrees. Existence, he argued, is a perfection. Therefore, a supremely perfect being cannot lack existence. It must exist.
The ontological argument, essentially.
A version of it, yes. He felt the connection between God's essence and existence was even clearer than the connection between a triangle's essence and its properties.
Why do people struggle with this idea then?
He thought it was because many people are too caught up in sensible objects, things they can touch or imagine. Imagination is tied to material things. But the ideas of God and the soul are purely intellectual, not sensory or imaginable in the same way.
Okay, so God exists. How does that help with the clear and distinct rule being reliable?
This is absolutely crucial for his whole system. The existence of a perfect God becomes the ultimate guarantee for his rule of truth. Because God is perfect, God cannot be a deceiver.
Ah, a perfect being wouldn't create us with faculties designed to mislead us when used properly.
Exactly. So the rule, whatever is clearly and distinctly conceived as true, is only absolutely certain because this perfect, truthful God exists and is the source of our being and our rational faculties. Our ability to perceive things clearly and distinctly comes from God.
And when our ideas are confused or obscure,
That stems from our own imperfection, our limitation, our participation in nothingness, as he put it. It's our fault, not God's. So without knowing God exists, even ideas that seem clear and distinct might still be products of some fundamental deception. God's existence underwrites the reliability of reason itself when properly used.
and does this solve the dream problem too, knowing God exists?
Yes, it does. Because a perfect God wouldn't deceive us wholesale, we can generally trust our clear and distinct perceptions when we are awake and using our reason carefully. While our senses can still mislead us in specific instances, like jaundice making things look yellow or stars looking small, reason itself, our faculty for clear thought, is fundamentally reliable.
So, waking reason, guaranteed by God, becomes the ultimate judge of truth, not imagination or senses.
Precisely. Reason is just clearer and more powerful when we're awake than in the often confused, imagination-driven state of dreams.
Okay, so he's established himself as a thinking thing, the rule of clear and distinct ideas, and the existence of a perfect God as guarantor. Where does he go in part 5, applying these principles?
Yes, he starts to deduce other truths, beginning with the physical world. He aimed to explain material objects based on the laws of nature, which, he argued, God established and impressed on our minds.
How did he approach physics?
Interestingly, he used a thought experiment to avoid getting bogged down in the scientific disputes of his time. He imagined a hypothetical new world, starting from chaos.
Like a simulation.
Sort of. He imagined God just imposing the fundamental laws of nature onto this chaos, and then described how, just by following these laws, matter would naturally arrange itself. How the heavens, stars, earth, elements, light, fire, even things like tides and mountains would form mechanically.
So, explaining the universe from basic physical laws.
Exactly. And this led him to a really radical idea for the time. That material bodies, including inanimate objects and even the bodies of animals, could be understood as incredibly complex machines.
Bodies as machines.
Yes, governed entirely by these natural physical laws. He even imagined God forming a body exactly like a human one, just using matter and heat according to these laws, but without giving it a rational soul initially.
And what could such a body do?
He argued it could perform many functions we see in ourselves and animals purely mechanically, independent of thought, digestion, breathing, reflexes, movement, much like animals operate.
And he gave a specific example, didn't he? The heart.
Yes, a very detailed one. The motion of the heart and the circulation of blood. He described the heart's structure, the chambers, the major vessels, the valves acting like one-way doors.
How did he explain the mechanism?
Purely mechanically. Blood flows into the heart chambers. The heart contains heat. He said you could feel it, which rarefies or expands the blood, like liquid heating up. This expansion inflates the heart, closing the inlet valves and pushing open the outlet valves, forcing blood into the arteries going to the lungs and the rest of the body.
And then it contracts.
Yes, as the blood cools slightly and leaves, the heart naturally contracts, the outlet valves snap shut, and the inlet valves open again, allowing fresh blood to flow in from the veins. It's like a pump driven by heat expansion.
Did he mention circulation? Harvey's discovery was quite recent then.
He did. To explain how the blood doesn't just run out, he mentions an English physician, clearly referring to William Harvey, who demonstrated that blood circulates, that it moves through tiny unseen passages from the arteries back into the veins and returns to the heart. Descartes incorporated this, supporting his mechanical view with evidence like the different feel of arterial and venous blood, the thickness of artery walls, pulse, and so on.
He even extended this mechanical view further, didn't he?
Oh, yes. Digestion, nutrition, even the nervous system. He proposed the idea of animal spirits.
The animal spirits, what were those?
He thought they were the finest, most agitated particles of the blood rising to the brain, like a very subtle wind or flame. These spirits then flowed through the nerves, which he pictured like hollow tubes into the muscles, mechanically causing them to contract or relax, producing movement.
So even nerve impulses and muscle action were mechanical.
In his view, yes. It was all about pressure, flow, and mechanics. He described how external senses could impress patterns on the brain via these spirits, leading to responses, memory storage, changes in the brain tissue, all working like a complex machine. He compared animal bodies explicitly to human-made automata, like sophisticated clocks or moving figures, just infinitely better crafted by God.
Okay, so animals are just complex biological machines, but humans?
That's where he drew a very sharp line. He argued that while animal bodies are machines, humans are fundamentally different. And he proposed two most certain tests to distinguish a real human possessing reason from a mere machine or animal, a brute, as he called them.
What's the first test?
Language use. He said you could maybe build a machine to utter words, maybe even respond to specific physical cues with specific sounds. But no machine could ever arrange words variously, creatively, to declare its thoughts and respond relevantly to the meaning of whatever is said in its presence, the way even the dullest human can.
So it's not just mimicking sounds, it's the flexible, meaningful use of language to express thoughts.
Exactly. That adaptability, responding to the sense of things, not just the sound or physical trigger.
Okay, and the second test?
Action guided by knowledge, not just specific programming. Machines or animals might perform certain specific tasks perfectly, maybe even better than humans if they're designed for it. Like a clock tells time better than we can guess.
Right.
But they fail in other situations. They act only according to the specific disposition of their organs or programming for that task. Human reason, however, he called a universal instrument that could be applied to all sorts of different circumstances.
We can adapt and figure things out in new situations.
Yes. He argued it would be morally impossible, meaning practically inconceivable, to design a machine with enough different mechanisms, organs, to allow it to act appropriately in every possible contingency of life, the way reason allows humans to. It lacks that universal adaptability.
So these two tests, flexible language use and universally applicable reason, prove animals lack reason.
That was his conclusion. Not that they just have less reason than humans, but that they have none at all. Their complex behaviors, like a bird building a nest, or just nature acting through the mechanical disposition of their organs, like a clockwork mechanism.
And this difference points to what?
To the rational soul in humans. He argued, this soul, the thing that thinks and uses reason and language, cannot possibly be derived from the power of matter. It's not a physical thing. It must be something distinct, expressly created by God.
And connected to the body somehow.
Yes, closely united with the body, he stressed. Not just like a pilot in a ship, controlling it from afar. It has to be intimately joined to experience sensations, appetites, emotions, and truly constitute a single, real human being.
And this understanding of the soul's nature being non-material led him to thoughts on immortality.
It did. If the soul's essence is purely thinking and it's independent of the body for its existence, then it's not necessarily liable to die when the body dies. Since we don't observe any other natural causes that could destroy a non-material thinking substance, he concluded the human soul must be immortal.
Quite a journey from doubting everything to explaining physics, the body, and the immortal soul.
A huge intellectual arc. But then in part 6, he explains why, after developing all this, he hesitated to publish his big work, his treatise containing these ideas.
Right, he finished it but held back. Why?
He mentions he'd actually finished it 3 years earlier and was getting ready to share it. But then he heard that a certain physics doctrine, likely referring to Galileo's condemnation, had been censured by authorities.
So he got worried.
He became very cautious. He feared his own work, even though he believed it was true and harmless, might also stir up controversy or cause trouble. And frankly, he preferred a quiet life of study and retirement over public disputes.
He didn't feel obligated to publish everything.
Not necessarily purely speculative science or moral philosophy. He noted, rather wryly, that everyone thinks they're wise in those areas anyway, and people trying to reform things are rarely welcomed.
But something changed his mind, specifically about the physics part.
Yes. He started thinking about the practical applications of his physics principles. He realized they could lead to knowledge that would make humanity, as he famously put it, lords and possessors of nature.
Making nature work for us.
Essentially. And the most crucial application he saw was in preserving health, which he called the most fundamental blessing and the foundation for all others. Since the mind depends so much on the body's condition, better understanding the body and finding remedies could alleviate so much suffering from illness and aging.
A very practical, almost medical motivation.
Very much so. He saw a clear path towards developing this incredibly useful science, but he also saw a huge obstacle.
Which was?
It required an enormous number of experiments, far more than any single person, even him, could possibly perform in a lifetime. He needed data, observations, tests.
Ah, so the scale of the task was too big for one person.
Exactly. And this led him to see the necessity of collaboration. To make real progress in this vital practical science, he felt he had to communicate what he had found so far, the little I might myself have found, as he put it.
To get others involved.
Yes, to incite others, especially men of superior genius, to contribute their own experiments, share their findings, and build upon his work. He saw scientific advancement as a collective enterprise, needing many hands and minds working together over time.
That sounds quite modern, actually.
It does. He noted that experiments become more crucial as you move from general principles to specific applications. He could explain many common things with his basic physics, but inventing specific devices or understanding detailed processes needed targeted experiments.
And he wasn't impressed with the existing experiments.
He found many poorly described, unreliable, or even faked to fit pre-existing theories. He much preferred doing experiments himself or with paid help he could direct, finding it hard to trust or use the work of others unless it was very carefully done.
So why publish the Discourse now, this shorter work, but not the full treatise yet?
He gives a couple of main reasons. First, simple reputation management. If he stayed completely silent after years of work, people might speculate negatively about why. He didn't crave fame, but he didn't want a bad reputation either.
Understandable. And the second reason?
More importantly, perhaps, was that need for help with the infinity of experiments. By publishing the Discourse and some specimens of his work, he hoped to show people the potential of his approach.
Kind of like an advertisement for his method.
In a way. To make others aware of the project and how they could assist. Even if he didn't expect massive immediate help, he wanted to lay out the path so future generations wouldn't blame him for holding back knowledge that required collaboration.
So the included essays, like on optics and meteorology, were examples.
Exactly. He chose topics that demonstrated his method's power, but weren't necessarily the most controversial parts of his system, and didn't reveal all his foundational principles. Just enough to show what was possible.
Was he open to criticism?
He said he welcomed objections sent via his publisher. He promised to reply, frankly admit errors if convinced, or defend his position clearly, but without getting sidetracked into endless debates on new topics. He wasn't apologizing for his ideas being new. If they were based on reason and common sense, that's what mattered.
And why write it in French, not Latin, the usual scholarly language?
That was a deliberate choice. He said he valued the judgment of people using their unprejudiced natural reason more than those who only deferred to ancient authorities, often associated with Latin scholarship. He hoped to reach those who combined good sense with study and believed they wouldn't refuse to read him in their native French.
Interesting. Aiming for a different kind of reader.
Possibly. And he wrapped up by reaffirming his commitment to spend the rest of his life acquiring knowledge of nature, aiming especially to find more certain rules for medicine. He explicitly rejected pursuits harmful to others and reiterated his preference for quiet study over worldly honors.
He still felt he had much more to learn.
Oh, definitely. He acknowledged how little he knew compared to the vast amount still undiscovered. He used analogies like scientific progress being easier once you have a solid base, like getting richer is easier once you have capital, or winning battles is easier after initial victories. Overcoming those first fundamental errors and establishing the right method, he felt was the hardest part.
So there you have it. Descartes' really remarkable journey. Starting from that deep uncertainty he felt, despite having this top-tier education.
Yeah, using that radical doubt, that intense questioning, as a tool, not an endpoint. Using it to dig down until he hit something he felt was absolutely undeniable.
His own thinking existence. I think, therefore I am. The cogito.
The bedrock. And from there, building outwards, we traced how that led him to his rigorous method, those 4 rules demanding clarity, division, order, and completeness, all aimed at building knowledge securely, step by step.
And all ultimately guaranteed, in his view, by the existence of a perfect, non-deceiving God.
Right. And we saw the sheer ambition of his project, applying this method to understand the physical world as a giant mechanism.
Including the human body, that detailed explanation of the heart's motion, which really foreshadowed modern biology in some ways.
Absolutely. While still drawing that sharp, crucial distinction between the body as machine or animals as machines and the unique nature of the human mind, the rational soul, with its capacity for language and universal reason.
And ultimately, his goal wasn't just abstract knowledge, was it? It was practical, forward-looking.
Very much so. Using this knowledge to improve human life, especially health, making us lords and possessors of nature, but for beneficial ends. And crucially, recognizing that this huge project couldn't be done alone. It needed collective effort, shared knowledge, open communication.
Descartes' whole challenge really began, didn't it, with looking at the world of ideas around him, seeing all the conflict and confusion, and having the courage to ask, okay, hold on, can I really know anything for sure?
And his answer wasn't to find certainty out there initially, but to look inward, to doubt everything systematically and then rebuild his understanding piece by piece on the foundation of clear and distinct reason.
So, thinking about our own time, bombarded as we are with information, opinions, conflicting claims about what's true, where do you find your foundation? How do you apply your own reason to try and sort out what seems genuinely clear and distinct from what's just, well, noise or custom or somebody else's unexamined opinion? What stands out to you from Descartes' methodical quest for certainty?